And that tells me that it's more probably about politics than the actual letter of the law. And I think that will help the situation if a mom has another alternative to raising it herself. To have a two-state solution, you have to have two sides that want that solution. You could start oil exploration to see what is there. That would be an issue that he would be addressing as president. Is there another shoe to drop, something we don't know about? And if not, then why is he gone?
Joining us for more on climate change is Rod Thompson, president of the Sarasota Republican Club and founder of the RevolutionaryAct.com. Dr. David Hastings, a professor of marine science and chemistry at Eckerd College, and John Hollick, the mayor of Venice. Area Republicans were calling the mayor and others down in Venice to complain about this, and specifically the concern is whether there would be any kind of retribution either by the state or the federal government in terms of state and federal aid. Is that a fair concern?
It might be. I wouldn't really like there to see retribution in that respect, personally. I have a number of concerns about Venice or Sarasota or any of the cities doing it. One of them really revolves around not the technical question of constitutionality, but the idea that you have individual cities and states entering into voluntarily agreements with national powers. KrisAnne Hall wrote at the Revolutionary Act on that very thing. She's a constitutional scholar, and she raised the issue in a lot of thoughtful ways as far as, does this set more of an example for how cities and states would do this in the future? And the question then becomes, what happens now when federal law, say, conflicts with what the cities have said they want to do? If sanctuary cities are any lead for us, we have a real potential problem there if cities choose to abide by the Paris Accords and not by federal law. I think we can all see the dangerous road that would lead to.
It's funny how sometimes people bring up the issue of local rights over federal rights, but it seems different when we're dealing with issues like interstate issues like gun control and other things
so
like
I'll
that.
tell you one of the differences is that in this specific case, one of the very few things that is reserved for the federal government in the Constitution is treaties. There's a lot of things that we do that the federal government doesn't do that are specifically not allowed to anything but the states.
The climate is changing, and it's due to human influence. We're doing it. So that's what the climate change scientific community knows.
Rod, at the outset of the last segment, or in Kate's story, I pointed out there's just such a huge difference between Republicans and Democrats in terms of whether or not they believe the climate is changing. Something over 60% of Republicans, not even 20% of Republicans. Why is that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the question of whether it's actually anthropogenic. I think most of us, I mean myself, obviously there's some global warming going on. I've seen that past century and a half. We also know that for the vast majority of the Earth's existence, tens of millions of years in that scale, it's been warmer than it is now. So perhaps the Earth is going back towards its more natural average. So I believe the professor would say it's going much faster now than we've seen it in the past. That could be. We know that carbon emissions are a greenhouse gas. We know greenhouse gases trap warmth. We know all these things. What I am very unconvinced about is the degree to which we have anthropogenic warming. The degree to which,
Explain what that is.
Man-made. The degree to which the warming that's going on right now is driven primarily by CO2 emissions by man. I am really unconvinced of that case. The professor will try to convince us, and maybe can at some point, but I'm not convinced of it. But it might be. I am where the mayor there that you quoted is. It might be the case. I'm just not convinced at this point.
A lot of people have said that the president's decision to withdraw from Paris was a bad business decision because there is a growing industry in the United States in terms of green energy. The same industries are popping up around the world, and the question is who is going to take advantage of it first.
I don't understand why us pulling out of the Paris Accords would affect private industry and what they're doing to supply both domestically and foreign solar panels, solar power, generators, etc. All of that industry should continue unabated unless the only reason that it was doing well because it was getting massive government subsidies. Now that would be a different issue and a whole different conversation and would suggest that it's not nearly as efficient as is suggested in the whereas clauses of Venice and City of Sarasota's what they just passed.
Right, because the president is talking about more offshore drilling off the other coast. People are still concerned about whether or not we will have drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, would you, in terms of our energy needs, is that something a direction that you would prefer us to go in, more than developing solar and wind and other, renewable
Well,
energy?
if I could wave a wand, I would definitely go with the renewable energy. All things being equal, of course, that would be the way to go. Solar first, because we're the Sunshine State. Wind, we're surrounded by water, so we're going to have a lot of wind. That would be great. But if the requirement, if it's not all things equal, and the requirement is that it takes huge amounts of taxpayer subsidies to make these things work for an indefinite period of time, then I think we have a trade-off that we have to really question.
And countries like China and India, France, Germany, they're going to profit from it because they're the ones that are going to be making money on these wind turbines, the solar photovoltaics. We're left behind.
And Rod, you get the last
Oh,
word.
I still fail to see why we cannot compete with China and Germany and India to create these things unless their governments are subsidizing those industries for doing it. One of my concerns about this too is for like the city of Sarasota specifically has, lots of pension issues, has serious financial issues and problems. It was in the last campaign a lot. If this is costly and costly up front, which I think it is, we're talking about subsidies that are needed, if they're adding more costs to try and get cleaner energy, even if it's a lofty goal, that's a big trade-off for a city already in financial problems. What's going to be the cost for other programs and other services of the city down the road?